All right, Graceland Recovery is a PHP IOP treatment center located in Memphis, Tennessee. Graceland Recovery specializes in providing treatment for persons experiencing substance abuse as well as mental health disorders. Graceland Recovery believes it is important to treat individuals with a personalized treatment modality based on what he or she is experiencing. The contact for Graceland is Amanda Walker. Please give her a call if you're interested in their programs. And now we're going to hear a word from our sponsor, Alliance Health Services.
I was just some hopeless addict that wasn't going to get out of it. I chose drugs over my kids. I was living in an abandoned house. And so I woke up one morning freezing and sick. And I went to a restaurant and called my mom. I was in tears and I said, I need help. I want out of this. I miss my children. I want my life back.
I lost 40 years of my life doing drugs. My drug use took me places that I would never think I'd been before. And that's prison. Because of my robberies and stealing and attempt murders. And that's all because of my drug use.
The first thing you have to do in treating any of this is you have to get them to stop using. But that's just the first step. You still have to treat the underlying causes and conditions. So AHS treats the whole person. We have the ability to provide the substance abuse and the mental health services. And so these people can begin rebuilding their lives.
Any type of addiction, we are able to handle it. And we have to keep that open so that people can know that we're here to service them.
They come in a crisis. They come in scared. And that's what makes it special there at Alliance, because we'll find a way to help you.
Well, I had never been to a rehab or anything before, so I didn't really know what to expect. I was scared, and I just knew, though, like I needed help, like I couldn't do this on my own. When I called AHS and they told me to get down there, and they treated me like a normal human being, which I wasn't used to for a long time, and I felt comfortable immediately.
When they come in or they present to the crisis center, as a nurse, you have to take a quick assessment. They need someone who they can actually look at and to trust. And so once you get that patient to bond with you, and then they will allow you to start the detox process.
So we have a few medications that we use to treat opiate use disorder, but it's just a tool that allows them to engage in the treatment, the recovery. So that's what you do in the groups.
You were disconnected. You chose family. The group therapy is so important for their recovery process. Why? Because they get a chance to see others going through some of the same things in their lives. So when you start to see people that look like you, that feel like you, it lets you know, hey, I can actually make it through this entire process.
Guided me in the right direction that I needed to go. Group therapy has helped me so much because you listen to everybody's stories. It's remarkable.
I mean, I had no family. I lost my kids. I mean, there are so many people out there just like me. The group is what really saved my life.
I'm here today to tell my story, that I'm clean and sober for 19 months. And I've never been clean this long in my life. When I first came at AHS, I felt miserable, and now I felt wonderful.
When I first came into AHS, I felt lost. And today I have my life back. I work, I'm able to afford things for my kids. I'm so close to having them back, and they love me unconditionally. And our relationship today is just, it's better than it was before.
Guys, what we're actually going to basically talk about today. I love to see people win, and to see somebody come in the state that they come in and advance and get discharged from this program is a major win.
And you made it. And you're doing better. Yeah. What we really need to serve more people is we need more resources. And what it boils down to is we need more funding. If there were no Alliance Healthcare, all these social ramifications of mental health and substance use disorders would just be much more prevalent in our community. In Alliance, we treat them all. We've got a path to healing for everybody.
Our not-for-profit organization is the largest comprehensive behavioral health provider in Shelby County. We offer outpatient, intensive outpatient, home-based, and community-based programs, including a continuum of crisis services to over 22,000 residents of Shelby County and the surrounding areas. We accept a variety of insurance plans, including Medicare and TennCare. Each of our outpatient clinics and its crisis assessment centers are licensed by the Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services to provide outpatient mental health services and outpatient substance abuse services. From alcohol and drug therapy, individual and group therapy, crisis services to medically monitored chemical detox, parent-child interaction therapy, and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, our clients can rest assured all of their mental health care needs will be met. We want to give a big shout out to Alliance Healthcare Services. They are another community partner of ours whose services we would not be able to operate without. And now I'm going to turn it over to Olivia, and Alliance has sponsored our next speaker, David Jernigan, and she will come on and introduce him.
Our fourth presenter today is David Jernigan. He is a professor in the Department of Health, Law, Policy, and Management, and Assistant Dean for Practice at the Boston University School of Public Health. He co-founded the Maryland Collaborative to reduce college drinking and related problems. Dr. Jernigan is also the scientific chair and serves on the board of the Global Alcohol Policy Alliance. He has written more than 150 peer-reviewed journal articles and contributed chapters to 7 books on alcohol issues. He has also co-authored, He has also co-authored a book on alcohol and public health. He has served as an advisor to the World Bank and the World Health Organization, and was the principal author of the World Health Organization's first Global Status Report on Alcohol and the Global Status Report on Alcohol in Youth. Please join me in welcoming David Jernigan.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me and can you see my slides? Can you hear me and can you see my slides?
Yes and yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks for that kind introduction. A pleasure to be with you today. A little bit more about me. Besides all those lovely things you heard in my bio, I'm actually the son of a Methodist minister and a public health nurse. I landed somewhere in between the two. I was raised in the Protestant tradition of social justice and doing the right thing. We had little or no alcohol at home. My father would have a beer once a year with his students and then store the beer in the basement until the next year, which showed you how much he knew about beer. I'm also a parent and a grandparent, but I'm in all of this because of my personal story, not about alcohol, but about what I was taught by my parents to do, which was to speak truth to power and to seek to do the right thing. We hear a lot of talk these days about how divided we are as a country, and I found it useful to just remind us that there's so much that unites us. Commitment to the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And as part of this, the right to equal access to the opportunity to be healthy throughout the course of our lives. Also, the need to protect vulnerable groups, including young people, from being deprived of these rights. So our common concerns are the basis for our common efforts. I'm going to talk about violence, but I want to give you a sort of a picture of different types of violence. There's certainly personal violence, and overtly it's things like aggravated and sexual assault. Covertly, things like extreme neglect of children. But there's also institutional violence. You've heard a lot about in recent years, police brutality, mass incarceration. There's also covert institutional violence, colonial oppression, the legacy of slavery, and so on. So I want to start to talk about alcohol from the perspective of institutional violence first. And I'm going to do a little history lesson. From this quote from George Santayana, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Well, alcohol has been with us in nearly all society, with some few exceptions. Wine and beer for at least 5,000 years, distilled spirits since about the 12th century AD. And every society has had to figure out how to control it. Many societies treated it as special, as spiritual or sacramental, and reserved its use just for the privileged, who quickly learned how to manipulate the alcohol supply as part of maintaining dominance. This is part of the covert violence of oppression supported by alcohol. Just a few examples. Indigenous North Americans were one of the few groups worldwide not to have developed alcohol as an intoxicant, so they had no cultural or biogenetic protections against it, and the colonizers used this as an instrument of dominance. Among the first laws passed to control indigenous populations on much of this continent were alcohol laws, with the excuse being the drunken Indian stereotype. And those laws moved forward with the quote unquote frontier, consistently providing the excuse for direct colonizer control of indigenous populations. The slave trade. This was humans to the Americas to harvest sugarcane, to be brought to New England, to be turned into rum, to be brought back to Africa to trade for humans. Alcohol playing a key role in that. In the British Empire, I had a spokesman for Customs and Excise Malaysia tell me in the 90s, British gave opium to the Chinese and alcohol to the Indians. This is Indians. The British controlled the toddy supply in India. In Malaysia, they manipulated the palm wine supply, in both cases to control the workforce. South Africa. The colonizers in Southern Africa debated among themselves how strong the alcohol should be to keep the workers sufficiently addicted that they wouldn't return to their villages, but not so addicted that they couldn't work. Up until this century, workers in the vineyards of South Africa's Western Cape were paid in alcoholic beverages. This is the DOP system, and this region still has among the highest prevalence of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders in the world. In the 20th century, in the latter half of the 20th century, alcohol as a social phenomenon went through a really important transition from being worldwide a traditional communally based beverage to a global beverage produced by huge and hugely profitable global corporations. And in the US, there was a sea change in alcohol marketing when Philip Morris, the tobacco company, bought Miller Beer in the 1970s and brought everything they'd learned about marketing tobacco to alcohol. Today, this industry has about $1.8 trillion a year in sales, and it's highly concentrated. That, for example, 10 companies sell 2/3 of the world's beer. If the 9 largest companies for which data are available were a country, they'd be the 55th largest economy in the world. And as of 2019, alcohol was the 8th most profitable industry in the world. Here in the US, 7 companies earn over half the revenues from alcohol. The impact of this high level of concentration as an industry means that these companies can extract monopoly and oligopoly profits, which they then plow back into big spending on marketing, which functions as what economists call a high barrier to entry. It costs a lot of money to compete with them. They keep generating that money through their monopoly and oligopoly profits. We've looked at the profits from underage drinking specifically. My team looked at this in 2016, and we calculated that underage drinking in that year was translating into about $17.5 billion in sales, with the biggest chunk of that going to three companies: Anheuser-Busch InBev, Miller Coors, and Diageo, the world's largest spirits maker. So that's the history, a little bit of the history of structural violence, but it hasn't stopped. And I just want to very briefly run through some of the ways that the industry's current marketing feeds into social injustice, social violence today. So let's start with sexism. This is an ad. She is on her knees adjusting her lipstick using her boyfriend's belt buckle as a mirror. I'll let you figure it out. This is an ad for whipped cream vodka, a product I'm not sure the world needed. Nonetheless, the model is dressed entirely in whipped cream. Given the relationship between alcohol and violence, it's sort of amazing that the tagline for this has been whipped lately. This is one of the industry's designated driver ads. And two things about this. First, it's not selling designated driver, it's selling her. And second, and I'll talk about this more, but when women are in the alcohol ads, they are the product. They are dressed like the product. You notice the red of her shirt matches the red of the Budweiser logo. Pink washing, alcohol is a carcinogen. 15% of breast cancer cases in the US considered caused by alcohol, but nonetheless, they're going to donate a little bit of money to cancer research. This is an ad that played in the women's magazines. He looks so wonderful, cuddly, he loves puppies, and he drinks Molson. This is the ad in that campaign that was in magazines targeted towards men, bragging that hundreds of thousands of women were being pre-programmed for your convenience. I mentioned women are the product. This ad was on the Oscars, and I couldn't say it any better than this ad. Those women have no identities of their own. They are dressed like the product. They end up in the product. This is what you see over and over, how women are being treated. They are objectified to the point that they become the alcohol product. Racism. This is the kind of thing that wouldn't have been so shocking 60 years ago, but it's what alcohol advertising looked like at that point, embracing racist stereotypes. But here's some more recent, the tropes in the ads targeting African Americans, using words like civilized. The use of colorism. It's often one man and two women in these ads, and the man is often darker than the two women. This said, nothing real heavy, not even the conversation. The implication is you can't have a black guy together with three white guys and not have a heavy conversation, except if you add Canadian mist to the situation. And then the stuff with Indigenous people. This is Sitting Bull, the degree to which products have been named after Indigenous leaders, despite the role that alcohol played in the subjugation and genocide of indigenous people. This is Crazy Horse malt liquor, and this was actually pulled from the market as a result of a campaign by indigenous leaders who successfully made the case that it was an outrage to name an alcohol product after one of their historic leaders. Which brings us to cultural appropriation. You see this in particular with Latinx populations. Cinco de Mayo was created by Chicano activists as an opportunity to celebrate Chicano pride. Alcohol companies have turned it into a drinking holiday. Drink like a patron, tipsy, hashtags tipsy for Cinco. One company called it Drinko de Mayo, and so on. And then lying about the effects. These are from some of the policy statements of industry-funded organizations. Many feel there's insufficient evidence regarding moderate consumption of alcohol during pregnancy and the effect it may have on the developing fetus. Well, there's certainly not necessarily a causal relationship between all potential risk factors and FASD. For example, other maternal risk factors, including drinking alone, family members who abuse alcohol, having less stable domestic partnerships, and being at risk for domestic violence, the implication being that those are the things that are causing higher risk for fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Hard to believe. Concealing the effects. In the COVID pandemic, the World Health Organization's advice was basically don't drink because alcohol weakens the ability of the body's immune system to fight off pathogens. This is particularly true in the lungs, which are particularly targeted by COVID-19. And yet the industry's message is hashtag socialize responsibly, keep those bars open, keep the product coming. And their Facebook and Instagram messages during COVID. This is from an Australian study. They looked at Facebook on a single Friday night in Australia in April 2020, found one alcohol ad every 35 seconds saying things like get easy access to alcohol without leaving your home, save money, buy more, drink alcohol during the pandemic, use alcohol to cope, survive, or feel better, and choose the healthier alcohol products. And then they blame the victim. As Philip Morris put it, it's a mistake to blame the product for alcohol abuse. Individual drinkers are responsible for their behavior. Miller, as long as the public continues to view any consumption of alcohol and abusive consumption of alcohol as two different subjects, a view the brewing industry has successfully encouraged, the majority of the anti-alcohol agenda will not be met with much success. Now, there are portions of the recovery community that are starting to figure this out, that part of what that community battles is the stigma. And the industry's framing of the whole issue simply feeds that stigma. This is all the result of the people who end up drinking too much. Okay. What's the reality about alcohol worldwide? It's a product that causes about 3 million deaths every year. In the US, it causes about 104,000 deaths. Costs $249 billion in 2010. It's the most commonly used drug in the US. About 53% of the population had alcohol in the last month, which is actually less than many people think. In other words, 47% different, but it's the fourth leading actual cause of death. It is responsible for 1 in 10 deaths among working age adults. And it contributes to more than 200 disease and injury conditions in the International Classification of Diseases. Things have gotten worse in this century. Actually, things have gotten worse during the pandemic. The slide, no, let's see, just a minute. Yes, okay, good. I can't remember what I did. Okay, things have gotten worse since the turn of the century, with alcohol-specific death rates up 35%, emergency room visits involving alcohol consumption up 47%, and the age-adjusted death rate for alcoholic liver disease, which is kind of a canary in the coal mine for the whole range of alcohol problems, up 37% since the turn of this century. At the start of the pandemic, there was a huge increase in particularly off-premise sales for alcohol. What's been the implication of that in terms of alcohol problems during the pandemic? Well, this just came out last month in JAMA. We've had a 25% increase in deaths involving alcohol directly, a 26% increase in the age-adjusted death rate from alcohol, with the largest increase of any age group happening among 35 to 44-year-olds. And what's been happening with alcohol and violent crime during the pandemic? Well, what we know is that violent crime is up significantly, and these are simply showing, since the start of the pandemic, the magnitude of the increase in homicide in city after city, with no concomitant increase in robbery, burglary, larceny, or drug offenses. We're talking about violent crime here. None of those stories that talk about violent crime during the pandemic mention alcohol. I know, I've looked. So what do we know about alcohol's role in interpersonal violence today? The relationship is bidirectional, and that alcohol consumption leads to violence, and victims of violence are more likely to have been drinking alcohol. The intimate partner violence, there's a clear association between alcohol use and physical and sexual violence victimization among women. 55% of victims of intimate partner violence who believe their partner, who knew their partners, who could report on it, believed their partner had been drinking prior to a physical assault. Homicide. Alcohol is the #1 drug used by homicide offenders. The CDC estimate is that about 47% of homicides would not have happened were alcohol not in the picture. Homicide victimization. 40% of homicide victims had a positive blood alcohol concentration. Firearm violence. The rates of alcohol involvement, the rates of alcohol attributable violence exceed the rates of alcohol attributable motor vehicle crashes for both males and females. When I talk to groups about alcohol, they usually think of two problems: addiction and car crashes. And what I'm saying here is that actually the violence connection, alcohol attributable violence, is even higher than the alcohol attributable motor vehicle crash rate. Suicide. Of the 44,000 suicides in the US each year, about 10,000 are attributable to alcohol use. And compared to the general population, people with alcohol use disorders have significantly greater odds of suicide attempts, death from suicide, and suicidal ideation. Sexual assaults. Alcohol is the substance most frequently used to facilitate sexual assault. 1 in 2 sexual assaults involve alcohol. Sexual assault victimization. Women who drink 6 or more standard drinks per day are more likely to be victims of sexual assault. This is not in any way to blame the victim. It's just saying alcohol in the picture makes everybody more vulnerable. These are the alcohol attributable fractions of the various categories of violence. According to the Centers for Disease Control, I mentioned the 47% for homicide, but also substantial portions of rape, aggravated assault, and suicide. Why is this happening? How does this work? There are 2 main theories. One is direct, which is people consume alcohol. They then disinhibit. It takes away the mental and sometimes the social barriers, which then can lead to violence. The indirect theory, a little more complicated. There are actual things that alcohol does in the brain that make people more likely to respond to provocation in a violent way. What does the industry say about the association between alcohol and violence? Too many domestic abusers use alcohol as an excuse not to change. Alcohol does not cause the battery any more than stress, illness, or being out of control does. Domestic violence is a learned and chosen behavior intended to control an intimate partner. In other words, it is all the fault of the individuals. The product has nothing to do with it, despite the fact that the product is both biologically and sociologically a disinhibitor. If nothing else, then the relationship between alcohol and violence is bidirectional. Alcohol increases the risk of violence perpetration and victimization, and it increases the severity of violent episodes, and alcohol is involved in about 1/3 to 1/2 of violent crimes. So what do we do? Now that I've thoroughly depressed you, this is the World Health Organization's version of how to make the world safer. And literally safer is a mnemonic. These are the things that are the best buys, which is strengthening restrictions on availability, enforcing comprehensive bans or restrictions on alcohol advertising, and raising prices on alcohol, usually through excise taxes. Those are the best buys. And then the two good buys, advancing and enforcing drink driving countermeasures, and facilitating greater access to screening, reefer prevention, and treatment. The difference between the best buys and the good buys is the best buys are the ones that have been considered to be most effective and cost effective. They have the strongest research base, and they're incredibly cheap to implement if the political will is there. What does this mean at a city level? Well, violent crime increases when neighborhoods have a high density of places that sell or serve alcohol. And this is a large literature that focuses on this concept of alcohol outlet density. How many outlets are clustered in a single geographic space? The community guide from the Centers for Disease Control defines alcohol outlet density as the number of physical locations in which alcoholic beverages are available for purchase, either per area or per population. And outlets include all commercial businesses that sell and serve alcohol. So this is both on-premise, things like bars and restaurants, and off-premise, things like grocery stores, convenience stores, liquor stores, and so on. So this slide just tells you both off-premise and on-premise locations. The science was strong enough that the Community Preventive Services Task Force recommended limiting alcohol outlet density to reduce excessive drinking through the use of licensing or zoning processes. What does the research tell us? We have studies in city after city after city that show that when the number of alcohol outlets increases, so does violence and crime, sexually transmitted infections, noise, injury, and property damage. City specific, in Philadelphia, you have a greater risk of being shot in an assault in an area with high alcohol outlet availability. New Orleans, 10% increase in alcohol outlet density was associated with a 5.8 rise in gonorrhea rates. In California, the number of off-premise outlets was associated with rates of child abuse, and the number of bars associated with the rates of child neglect, and so on and so on. These are all published studies. They've all controlled for all sorts of other factors, and then been able to tease out a discrete relationship. For instance, Baltimore, every additional outlet you add to a census tract was associated with a 2.2 increase in violent crime. Underage drinking. Study of 50 South California cities, adolescent alcohol use and heavy drinking appeared to be influenced by three things: enforcement of underage drinking laws, but alcohol outlet density and adult alcohol use. Excuse me, another California study, zip code alcohol outlet density was significantly and positively related to the likelihood and frequency of getting alcohol. And then an Oregon study, the relationship between outlet density and youth drinking, driving, and riding with drinking drivers. Young people who grow up in neighborhoods that have large numbers of alcohol outlets are much more likely to report feeling unsafe in their neighborhood, and a 10% increase in alcohol outlet density is associated with the 17% increase in the odds of underage drinking. Part of what happens is crowding leads to violence. And so this is another Baltimore study. You add one on-premise or one off-premise outlet to a census tract, and you get that corresponding increase in violent crime. specific business practices. Each additional 1 hour increase in operating hours is associated with more assaults. More shelf space devoted to single serving containers associated with violence. More advertising is associated with sexual violence, as well as violence generally. This is another study that my team did in Baltimore City. So what does this look like at the city level? We mapped lots of cities, and these maps are showing two things. The redder the area on the map, the greater the concentration of off-premise alcohol outlets. And then those black polygons, those are the high crime areas in each city. You can see just visually the correspondence between where the alcohol outlets are clustered and where the high crime areas are. This is a similar picture for Memphis, where there are 25 times more off-premise alcohol retailers than public libraries, and 15 times more off-premise alcohol retailers than public high schools. One of the things about drinking is that it increases with income. And this is binge drinking. People who make more than $75,000 a year are substantially more likely to be binge drinkers than people who make $25,000 or less. Similarly, in terms of race and ethnicity, white people are the group most likely to be binge drinking, followed by Hispanic, and you see Black folks way down there in terms of the comparisons. In fact, African Americans are generally less likely to drink and binge drinking than the general population, but if they do drink, they do so often and with higher intensity and have higher levels of alcohol-related consequences, greater relationship, employment, financial and legal products, and a higher prevalence of alcohol-related diseases, including heart disease and hypertension. The bottom line, African Americans drink less, but if they drink, they suffer greater consequences. And yet, where are the outlets? Poor people drink less than wealthier people. White people drink more than Black people. And yet the outlets are concentrated in the high poverty areas, in the high non-white areas, more in the higher Black percentage of the population, more in the higher Latino percentage of the population. And these are the same places where the violence is clustered. This is a social justice issue. This is an equity issue. This is the city of San Antonio. We picked two zip codes, one where the median income is 125,000, one where the median income is 25,000. You can see the population makeup in the higher income one, mostly Caucasian. You can see in the lower income one, much more representation of African American and Hispanic. And yet the wealthier, the poorer neighborhood has 4 times as many off-premise alcohol outlets per 1,000 residents than the wealthier neighborhood. Same thing in Baltimore, Roland Park, fairly wealthy neighborhood, Greenmount East, much lower income neighborhood. Greenmount East has 7 times as many off-premise outlets per 1,000 residents as Roland Park. How did this come to be? One word, redlining. There's a history here, and now we're back to structural and institutional violence. Redlining was something that happened in the 1930s and 40s by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, indicating which neighborhoods were okay for investment, determining which neighborhoods businesses could get bank loans to start. Most businesses could not start in the greater percentage minority neighborhoods, in the lower income neighborhoods. And so the implication of that over time, excuse me, this is Oakland, California. The green area was absolutely lent to these areas. The blue area, similar. The yellow and red were the places that were literally redlined. And yet all those little black dots, those are the alcohol outlets. The alcohol outlets ended up clustered in, encouraged towards the poor and minority communities. So same thing happened in Memphis. This is Memphis redlining in 1940, and just keep those colors and that pattern in mind. Then this is our graph of Memphis and the concentration of alcohol outlets and the high crime areas. And you see that interesting shape. Hang on there. And then this is household income in Memphis today. And you can see this interesting pattern here. Tracks the low income households in the city of Memphis. So what do we do about this? Well, there is a policy solution. We call it safer alcohol sales. There are three things that cities can address problem alcohol outlets. They can use their licensing authority. It's available to cities in some, but not all states. Far more cities can use planning and zoning powers. These are generally within city control. And then even more widespread, they can use their nuisance powers. These apply to more than just alcohol outlets. They give cities general power to regulate nuisance activities within their borders. So these are the three legal authorities that cities can use to address problem alcohol outlets in their neighborhoods. Is this effective? The best study we have is from Atlanta, where there was an intentional 3% reduction in the number of alcohol outlets in the Buckhead neighborhood, and it led to a twofold greater reduction in exposure to violent crime in that neighborhood compared to two comparable neighborhoods studied over a 4-year period. Los Angeles, we had the Rodney King uprising in the early 90s, and the census tracts that had reductions in the census tracts had reductions after those events in violent crime that were proportional to their reductions in alcohol outlets. I should say South Central itself went from more than 700 alcohol outlets overnight to less than 200. And with that came then a significant reduction in violent crime. So how do you do this? What are the goals? We want to make it more difficult to get alcohol generally. We'll do this by increasing the distance you have to travel to get alcohol, which then decreases ease of access and consumption rates. Decrease the price of alcohol by decreasing competition. When you have a lot of outlets clustered in one area, they will compete on price and prices will go down. And then you'll also decrease exposure to point of purchase and exterior facing window alcohol marketing. Preemption is an issue here. I know you're fighting a preemption battle in Tennessee over tobacco. The news is better for Tennessee in terms of alcohol. This is a map that we have of preemption across the 50 states. And for Tennessee, for alcohol, cities have, or localities have, joint licensing power over spirits and wine and full local licensing power over beer sales. This is all coming from a project called City Health. This is an initiative of the De Beaumont Foundation and Kaiser Permanente. It's a package of what are now 12 policy recommendations with significant potential to boost health, well-being, and quality of life by addressing key social determinants. Every year, we assess the nation's largest cities on the presence and strength of the policies within the package, and then we give them medals, gold, silver, or bronze, depending how strong their policies are. So this is the whole policy package. You can see at the bottom, one of the elements here is safer alcohol sales. These are the city health cities. If you look quickly, you can see we've got a couple in Tennessee, and Memphis itself gets a silver medal in our safer alcohol sales policy criteria. They have a policy, but it's got a big loophole in that it applies only to on sale and off sale beer permittees. It does not apply to new and existing retailers that sell wine and distilled spirits. So part of the way there, not as good a policy as we would like to see. And of course, beyond the medal ranking, there are best practices for implementing these policies. There are enforcement protocols. Some cities have levied fees on the outlets to fund dedicated enforcement. And then there are, of course, nuisance ordinances that can be used more generally to promote healthy retail sectors citywide. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance, as Frederick Douglass so aptly put it. And when it comes to alcohol, we have lost our vigilance. We have to wake up. Alcohol companies have literally wallpapered our lives with their version of the alcohol story, that alcohol is everywhere and belongs there, that everyone drinks, that freedom is the route to freedom and independence, drinking is the route to freedom, independence, and success, and that this is not about a system and a product with a legacy and a present that feeds injustice and misery. This is all about individual people with an individual problem. We have to take back that alcohol story and tell a different story. Our stories matter. The stories of people in recovery that you saw just before I spoke, they're so powerful, but we can tell a new and better alcohol story than the industry's telling, of children growing up free from pressure to drink, of Black, Indigenous, and people of color and women being respected, of individual drinkers not being blamed for the actions of a hugely profitable industry, of poor communities and communities of color not being flooded with alcohol outlets and associated violence, and of alcohol prices that reflect the real cost of alcohol and don't just function to make a rich industry richer. Our voices matter. We need to tell these new stories. We need to bring a general message of hope. We are battered and beaten down by the political power of the alcohol industry to create the world that is most advantageous to them and to their bottom line. And I love this quote from the Chinese poet and essayist Lu Xun: "Hope is like a road in the country. There never was a road, but when many people walk on it, the road comes into existence." My friends, we are these people. The road of hope we walk is that we can change the alcohol environments. We can change the alcohol story. And it's critical. Given the moment we're in, we have the opportunity. I firmly believe we can do this. Thank you very much. I don't know if we have any time for any questions. I don't know how you're handling that.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Jernigan. We have time for a few questions, so I'll just go ahead and get those started. The first question.
Slide down so that I can see you.
Got it. All right,
Great.
so the first question we have is, could you tell us a little bit about the relationship between food deserts and liquor stores?
I would love to. It's not been as closely studied as we would like, but what you see in city after city after city is the phenomenon of the corner store. And the corner store is surviving based on sales of junk food and of alcohol. In Baltimore, where I lived for 10 years, I used to do a Price is Right exercise to demonstrate the need for higher taxes on alcohol. Send a research assistant into the corner store and say, find me the cheapest form of liquid you can. And it would not be the milk, it would not be the orange juice, it would not be the soda pop, it would not be the water, it would be the beer. That's part of the situation we face. These food deserts are also what we call alcogenic environments. This is all part of cleaning up and creating healthy retail.
Oh, thank you. So for our next question, what are certain ways that we can encourage individuals to understand the harms of alcohol with it being so accepted in our society?
That is such a great question. And the first things we need to do is, an awful lot of us don't drink. And we need to say we don't drink. The drinkers make all the noise. And that feeds the perception that is so good for the industry, which is that everybody's doing it. And yet we know that everybody isn't doing it. We know that this is a product that falls into the 20/80 phenomenon, where 20% of the drinkers are drinking more than 80% of the alcohol. It's a minority of the population that drinks the vast majority of the alcohol. And many of us don't drink. It's an important thing to model. It's an important thing to talk about with young people. It is possible to have a great life and not drink.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question, just kind of going off that influence, would you say fourth wave feminism and third wave feminism impacted the way alcohol was advertised?
Absolutely, and the industry pays full attention to that. So interesting. In the messaging targeting women, women have agency. They are in charge. They are decision maker. But that is less than a quarter of the alcohol advertising that's out there. Most of it's targeting men. And the sexism in that advertising, I have shown you just a glimpse of it. It goes completely unquestioned. That's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So another one, how often are the redlining areas evaluated?
So evaluated in terms of what would be my question, we stumbled on redlining. I had a doctoral student who was focusing on alcohol outlet density for her dissertation, and she really wanted to figure out where did this come from. So she built some models. She looked at things over time. She looked at so many different factors. And the single biggest causal factor for the outlets being where they were in the city of Baltimore was the neighborhood being redlined. It's not the only one, but it was the single biggest one. This is a relatively recent literature, and it's exciting that this is emerging. I think that quote about, the price of liberty is vigilance. We're getting better at being vigilant and putting the pieces together to understand the role of alcohol in perpetuating social inequities.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Jernigan. I'm pretty sure that's all the questions we have for today. Again, the CE link, I just put it in the group chat. So make sure anybody who wants that clicks on it immediately.
Okay, let me just say, I am slide promiscuous and that I'm happy to share them. I've sent them to you all. So if people want them, I'm happy for them to have the slides. The important thing is for us to talk about this, to have these conversations. Thanks so much for letting me have a conversation with you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello, everyone. How's that? Dr. Jernigan, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. The coalition itself will be using that as a resource to help guide our practices. Thank you so much for being here with us today. So everybody listen, we really appreciate you being here. And like we said earlier, because of our amazing sponsors, we're able to keep this free for everyone. For those of you that are able to afford an admission ticket, we ask that you would donate to the Memphis Area Prevention Coalition. And I want to tell you a little bit about where that goes to. A lot of times people that suffer from substance use disorder are often overlooked. You see these people in the corner, you see them at stores, and you want to give them money, but you don't want it to go to the wrong causes. Well, that's where we come in. We serve over 100 individuals a week in person out on Court Street and on Summer Avenue. And oftentimes these people need things like a bus pass to get to Friends for Life for their HIV appointment, or they need a bus pass to get to detox because we can't provide transportation after we refer someone. Oftentimes they need food. And so we make sure that if they haven't eaten in a few days, we get them something to eat. A lot of times we also get medical supplies. If they have wounds and things like that, we offer free medical supplies, and we can't buy these things with state dollars. We can pay to have the programs ran, but we can't buy things like bus passes and food and things like that. Sometimes this money goes to like their first week of a halfway house if we can find them sober housing. Sometimes they need clothes for a new job. Or sometimes they need an ID to get a job. So anyway, seriously, if you can find it in your heart to donate to the Memphis Area Prevention Coalition,
We're going to have a QR code for Venmo that's going to be up for the entire break this time. And there's also, if you're not a Venmo person, we're going to have the address and who to make a check out or money order or just send cash to. You can send that to our fiscal agent, which is Church Health of Memphis here. So seriously, for those that you get, last year we raised, I think, $350 during the conference. This year we'd like to hit $500. And I'm not asking you to do anything that I won't do. Last year, I think the biggest donation was $50. This year, anybody, the highest donation that we get, I will personally match out of my own pocket. And so seriously, if you can afford $5, $10, $15, $20, whatever it might be, if you're grateful for this conference and being able to offer this to college students and upcoming healthcare professionals, please find it in your heart to donate. Like I said, this is a way to make sure that your money is going to help an underserved population and that it's going to the right things. So anyways, thank you. The QR code will be on the screen and the address will be on the screen as well. So please help us hit our goal. And once again, we thank you for being here.